The fire began at 2:17 a.m. in a small mountain village where silence was sacred and faith was older than memory. By dawn, the chapel of St. Michael was gone, reduced to blackened stones and twisted beams. But among the ashes, one thing remained: a white statue of the Virgin Mary, standing untouched, her hands folded, her face serene. The villagers said they saw him, the priest, still inside when the roof collapsed. He didn't scream, he didn't run. He simply knelt before that statue, holding his rosary, whispering, "Mother, into your hands I give my soul." When rescuers finally entered, they found no trace of his body, only the faint scent of roses in the air. For 3 days, no one spoke. And then something happened, something no one could explain. Drops of clear water began to flow from the statue's eyes. Some said it was condensation, others said it was impossible. But those who were there swear they heard a woman's voice in the wind. "Do not fear, my son welcomes those who give their lives for love." This is the story of Father Gabriel Nowak, the man who was tested by fire, and whose faith lit a miracle that still burns today. Nestled between pine-covered hills and a silver river, the village of Zakroa looked like a painting frozen in time. Wooden cottages leaned into each other, smoke rose from old chimneys, and every evening a single bell from St. Michael's Chapel told the people it was time to pray. At the heart of that small world stood Father Gabriel Nowak, a man whose faith seemed carved from the same stone as his church. He was 45, tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes that carried both kindness and quiet sorrow. People said he had once studied in Krakow, but returned home after his mother died, determined to rebuild the chapel that war had left in ruins. For 10 years, he lived in a small room behind the altar. He rose before dawn, tended the garden, and rang the bell with his own hands. Children loved his stories, farmers trusted his advice. And on Sundays, when the sunlight spilled through the stained glass, his voice filled the chapel like music. Faith, he would say, is not about seeing miracles, it's about becoming one. Behind the altar stood a statue of the Virgin Mary. He had restored himself, its surface cracked, its paint faded by time. He once told a parishioner, "She may look broken, but so do we. Yet somehow, heaven still works through what's imperfect." To the villagers, Father Gabriel was more than a priest. He was the heart of Zakroa, the bridge between their suffering and their hope. And yet, as autumn winds began to roll down from the mountains, whispers started spreading through the valley. Whispers that would soon test that hope like never before. It began with graffiti on the chapel wall. 3 words sprayed in red: "Idols burn too." Father Gabriel wiped it away with his bare hands before anyone else saw. He didn't report it. He didn't preach about it the next Sunday. Instead, he simply said, "When the world mocks what is sacred, our answer must still be love." But the whispers didn't stop. A new group had formed in the nearby town, angry, disillusioned men who claimed the church was a lie built on fear. They gathered in bars, drinking late into the night, boasting that they would teach the priest a lesson. One afternoon, Gabriel found a letter slipped under the chapel door. It read, "Stop deceiving the people. The age of Mary is over. If you keep spreading lies, the fire will cleanse you." He folded the note carefully and placed it under the statue of the Virgin. That night, as he prayed, his candle flickered violently, though there was no wind. He whispered, "If I must suffer for her, let my suffering be a prayer." In the days that followed, attendance at Mass dwindled. Some were afraid, others simply stayed silent. A few even began to question him. "Father, maybe it's safer to remove the statue for a while." But he only smiled gently. "You cannot hide a mother from her children," he said. "If darkness comes, her light will find a way." Autumn deepened. The valley grew colder. Each night Gabriel walked the empty streets, blessing every home, murmuring the rosary beneath his breath. And though he never said it aloud, a quiet fear had begun to take root, not for his life, but for his people. Because somewhere in those mountains, hatred was waiting, and soon it would come for him. October 3rd, 1991. The air in Zakrowa carried a strange stillness, the kind that makes dogs whine and candles flicker. Inside the small chapel of St. Michael, Father Gabriel knelt alone before the altar. The villagers had long gone home. Outside, the fog was thick, swallowing the moonlight. Only the faint sound of the river and the creaking wood of the pews kept him company. He had spent the whole day repairing a broken window pane, sweeping the floor, arranging flowers near the Virgin's statue. It was as if he knew he was preparing the chapel for something beyond his own understanding. In his hand was a small wooden rosary, darkened by years of use. He whispered each Hail Mary slowly, his voice trembling not from fear, but from love. On the altar lay an open letter addressed to the bishop in Krakow. In neat handwriting it read, "If anything should happen to me, know that I never stopped believing. The world may reject her, but a son never abandons his mother." At around midnight, the church bell rang once, though no one had pulled the rope. Startled, Father Gabriel looked up. The flame of the candle wavered, and for a brief second he thought he saw light shimmering around the statue of the Virgin Mary, a soft blue glow, as if the marble itself was breathing. A child's voice came from the doorway. It was Mateusz, the altar boy. "Father, I saw a woman in white outside, near the river," he said. Gabriel smiled gently, walking toward him. "Go home, my child. The angels are watching tonight." Mateusz hesitated. "Will you be all right, Father?" "Always," Gabriel whispered, "as long as she's here." When the boy left, Gabriel blew out the candle. The chapel fell into darkness, except for the faint glimmer on the statue's face. Outside, the wind began to rise, and in that still hour before dawn, destiny quietly took its place. It happened just before dawn. The fog had not yet lifted, and the first light of morning barely touched the steeple of St. Michael's. Inside, Father Gabriel was preparing for early Mass when he heard footsteps outside, hurried, chaotic, unfamiliar. Then came the sound of glass breaking. A stone crashed through a window, scattering shards across the pews. Before he could react, a wave of fire burst from the doorway, flames crawling up the wooden walls like living serpents. The men outside shouted. Their voices echoed through the valley. "Let the idols burn! No more lies!" The chapel filled with smoke. Father Gabriel ran toward the sacristy, coughing, searching for the exit. But when he turned back and saw the statue of the Virgin Mary, her white face glowing faintly through the smoke, he stopped. He could have fled. He could have saved himself. Instead, he knelt before her. The roof crackled above him, ash falling like snow. He pressed the rosary to his chest and whispered, "Holy Mother, forgive them. They don't know what they do." Outside, the villagers woke to the glow of orange light rising from the chapel hill. They ran barefoot, carrying buckets of water, shouting prayers as the flames devoured the night. But the fire was too strong. The doors were chained from the outside. From within, someone heard him, one last voice, calm amidst the chaos. "Mother, into your hands I give my soul." Moments later, the bell rang once, then silence. The roof collapsed with a roar that shook the ground. When the villagers finally broke in, the air was thick with smoke and the bitter scent of burning wood. Everything was destroyed, the altar, the pews, the walls blackened beyond recognition. But in the very center, where the flames had been strongest, the statue of the Virgin Mary stood untouched. Her face was clean, her veil still white, her eyes glistening as if wet with tears, and at her feet lay a single object, Father Gabriel's rosary, perfectly intact, its wooden beads still warm to the touch. No one spoke. No one dared to. Because in that moment, everyone in Zakrowa knew this was not the end. It was the beginning of something heaven had written in fire. The morning after the fire, the valley of Zakrowa was wrapped in silence. Ash floated in the air like gray snow. The once white chapel was now a blackened skeleton of stone and timber. Villagers gathered at the ruins, their faces pale, their hands trembling from both cold and grief. No one could find Father Gabriel's body, not even a trace. Only the faint scent of roses lingered among the ashes, sweet and impossible. The authorities arrived from the nearby city. They took photographs, made notes, and declared it an accidental fire caused by faulty wiring. But the people of Zakrowa knew better. There had been no electricity in the chapel. And those who had heard the men shouting in the night remained silent, afraid of retribution. At dusk they held a small vigil in front of the statue that had survived. It was moved to the center of the village square, surrounded by candles. Old women prayed aloud, children cried softly, and men stood in solemn silence with their hats pressed to their hearts. One woman said she had seen something strange that morning, a faint light above the ashes, and the chapel bell swinging by itself, though the rope had been burned away. Another claimed she heard singing, not from people, but from the wind itself, like a distant choir. The bishop sent word to close the chapel until proper investigation, but the villagers came anyway, every night. They would kneel before the statue and whisper the rosary, the same words Father Gabriel had prayed until his last breath. Days turned into a week. The smoke faded, yet the grief did not. And then, on the 9th day after the fire, something changed. At dawn, a farmer's wife walking past the square noticed droplets on the statue's face. She reached out to wipe them away, thinking it was dew, but the liquid was warm and salty. That was the first time they realized the statue was weeping. It began quietly, almost shyly, like heaven testing who was still watching. The first to notice was Marta Zielinska, a farmer's wife known for her honesty. She had walked past the square just after sunrise, a basket of bread in her hands. When she saw the statue's face, she froze. 2 clear drops traced down the marble cheeks, not rain, not dew. They shimmered in the early light like tears. She touched one with trembling fingers. It was warm, and when she smelled her hand, there was a fragrance, the unmistakable scent of fresh roses, though none bloomed that season. Within hours, word spread through the valley. By evening, dozens gathered in the square. They saw the same thing, the Virgin's eyes glistening, the faint glow around her face. Some knelt and prayed. Others simply stood in awe, unable to speak. That night, the scent of roses filled the air, drifting through every open window in Zakrowa. Even those who had mocked the church said they couldn't sleep. The fragrance followed them, soft and persistent. The next morning, a young journalist from Krakow arrived, Piotr Lewandowski, sent to expose what he called a village hoax. He carried an old camera and a skeptical heart. He took several photographs of the statue, wiped the tears himself, and found no source of moisture. Satisfied, he prepared to leave. But when he developed his photos later that night in his hotel room, he stopped breathing. In every image, behind the statue, there was light. Not glare, not reflection, but a figure, a faint outline of a woman in white, her hands extended toward the crowd. Piotr checked his negatives. The shape was still there. He didn't know it yet, but that single photograph would change everything, for him, for Zakrowa, and for the memory of the priest who had given his life 9 days earlier. The world would soon know about the tears of the Virgin, but no one would be ready for what came next. When Piotr Lewandowski returned to Zakrowa 3 days later, he wasn't the same man who had left. He told his editor he needed a few more photos for verification. In truth, He couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that mysterious light, the shape of a woman in white, glowing behind the statue. The villagers welcomed him cautiously. They had read his article draft online, calling the miracle a rural illusion. But when he stood before the statue again, the scent of roses still hung in the air, sweet and lingering. He took new photos in daylight, no flash, no tricks. And yet, when he looked through the viewfinder for just a heartbeat, he saw something move, a ripple of brightness like breath upon glass. He lowered the camera and stared, nothing, just marble. Inside the chapel ruins, he found the old altar boy, Mateusz, now quieter, withdrawn. The boy pointed to a corner of the burned floorboards. There, half buried in ash, was a small wooden box, charred on the outside but intact within. Inside it lay a journal, Father Gabriel's handwriting. The last line read, "Faith that burns cannot be destroyed. It becomes light." Piotr felt a chill run through him. He glanced toward the statue, the same statue he had mocked as a symbol of delusion, and in that moment a single drop formed on its cheek once again. He reached out instinctively and touched it. It was warm, alive. That night he didn't send his photos to the paper. He sat in his hotel room staring at the negatives under a lamp. There it was again, the faint silhouette, now clearer. A man kneeling beside the Virgin, Father Gabriel. Piotr's hands trembled. For the first time in years, he whispered words he thought he'd forgotten. "Hail Mary, full of grace." And somewhere in the stillness of that Polish night, he began to believe. 2 nights after Piotr found the journal, the boy Mateusz came knocking at his hotel door. His eyes were wide, his face pale. He clutched a small candle in his hand. "I saw her," he whispered. "The lady. She spoke to me." Piotr knelt to his level. "You mean in a dream?" Mateusz shook his head slowly. "No, not a dream. She was standing by the river, where Father Gabriel used to pray. She said, 'Your Father is with me. Tell them to pray and to forgive.'" The boy's voice trembled. Then she touched the water, and it turned into light. Piotr hesitated. He wanted to dismiss it, to call it imagination. But something in the boy's gaze, calm, luminous, silenced his skepticism. The next morning Mateusz led him down a narrow path behind the ruins of the chapel. Dew covered the grass. The air was cold and still. They stopped at the remains of the old altar, now nothing more than charred stone and ash. "Here," the boy said. He knelt and began to dig with his hands. A moment later he pulled something out, blackened by fire but strangely whole. It was a rosary, wooden and dark, the same one villagers had last seen in Father Gabriel's hands. Every bead was untouched, polished as if by invisible fingers. Piotr felt his throat tighten. He raised his camera but couldn't bring himself to take a photo. It didn't feel right. Instead, he bowed his head. For the first time since his childhood, he prayed, not to prove, not to record, but simply to believe. When he looked up, the morning light had broken through the clouds. The river below glowed with a soft golden hue, and for a fleeting second, Piotr thought he saw a reflection beside the boy. A woman in white, smiling gently, watching them both. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Zakroa had ever seen. People began arriving from nearby towns. Pilgrims, skeptics, even doctors. They came with candles, crutches, photographs of their sick loved ones. They came to see the statue that wept and the boy who had seen the lady. At first, the local authorities tried to stop them. Police blocked the main road, claiming safety concerns. But each night, more people found their way through forest trails, walking miles just to kneel in silence before the Virgin's face. Then the healings began. An old woman, blind in one eye, said she saw a burst of light when she touched the base of the statue, and the next morning she could see again. A young man injured in a mining accident left his crutches behind after praying for his son's recovery. A nurse from Krakow testified that her mother's cancer vanished after she prayed with the rosary from the ruins. Every story spread like wildfire, whispered from village to village, until Zakrowa became a river of pilgrims. Those who doubted stayed at the edge of the crowd, pretending they were only observing. But many of them wept when the scent of roses filled the air. Father Gabriel's name was spoken everywhere, not as a tragedy, but as a prayer. People began to call him the Shepherd of the Flame. Candles burned day and night at the square, and no matter how strong the wind blew, the central flame never went out. Even scientists who came to study the phenomenon admitted something they couldn't explain. The tears on the statue contained no minerals found in the region, only pure, distilled water. For the villagers, that was all the proof they needed. Heaven had answered. The fire meant for destruction had become light for the world. And in the quiet hours before dawn, when the crowds were gone, Mateusz said he could still hear Father Gabriel's voice near the statue. Pray for those who hate. They need love the most. By early spring, the story of Zakrowa had reached Rome. Reports of healings, tears, and the untouched statue filled Catholic newspapers across Europe. The Vatican, cautious as always, decided to send a small commission, 2 theologians, a physicist, and a priest known for investigating alleged miracles. Their arrival stirred both curiosity and fear. Would they confirm what the people already believed, or dismiss it as superstition? For 2 weeks, the team studied everything. They tested the statue's material, analyzed the liquid from its eyes, measured humidity, light, and temperature. Every test returned the same conclusion: no natural explanation. They interviewed witnesses, including Marta, Piotr, and young Mateusz. Each testimony matched in detail, even when told separately. When asked what he saw that night by the river, the boy simply said, "She was brighter than the fire that killed Father Gabriel, but gentle like dawn." The lead investigator, Father Antonio Rossi, spent a night alone in the small chapel where the statue had been moved for safety. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the same time the fire had started months before, the security camera recorded something extraordinary. A burst of light filled the room for 3 seconds, not flickering, not electrical. Within the glow appeared the shape of a man in white vestments, kneeling before the statue. His hands were folded, his head bowed. When the light faded, the camera kept rolling. No one else was there. But on the marble floor, where the figure had appeared, lay a small mark, the burned outline of a rosary. The next morning, Father Rossi wrote in his report, "If this is illusion, it is one that carries grace, and if it is grace, then the fire of Zakrowa still burns in heaven." Though the Vatican would not rush to proclaim it a miracle, those who had seen the evidence knew. Faith had left fingerprints science could not erase. Months passed. Spring turned to summer, and the valley of Zakrowa bloomed again. Where ashes had once covered the ground, wild roses began to grow, small, white, and fragrant. No one had planted them. The Bishop of Krakow returned to bless the site. During the ceremony, the villagers gathered around the statue, now placed under a glass canopy. Mateusz, now serving as an altar boy for the bishop himself, stood beside it holding Father Gabriel's rosary. When the prayers ended, the bishop opened the small wooden box found in the ruins, the one Piotr had discovered months earlier. Inside were several pages from Father Gabriel's journal, darkened at the edges but still legible. The final words read, "If faith is tested by fire, then let our love be the flame. What burns in us for her will become light for those who walk in darkness." The crowd fell silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Then, without warning, the chapel bell began to ring on its own, one clear note echoing through the valley. Children gasped, old men crossed themselves, and for a moment sunlight broke through the clouds and rested directly upon the statue's face, illuminating the tear-streaked cheeks like living skin. Many swore they saw something within that light, a faint outline of a woman holding a child, and beside her, a priest smiling. A year later, a small shrine was built over the ruins. It was named Our Lady of the Flame. Pilgrims came from all over Europe, bringing candles and flowers. Some came seeking healing. Others came simply to kneel and weep in gratitude. For Piotr, the journalist who once came to expose a hoax, Zakrowa became his second home. He never wrote another article about disbelief again. Instead, he published a book titled The Fire That Became Light. And in its opening line, he quoted Father Gabriel's final message, "Faith that burns cannot be destroyed. It becomes light." 20 years have passed since the fire of Zakrowa. The mountains are quieter now. The chapel, rebuilt in stone and glass, shines like a lantern at night, its bell ringing softly through the valley. Every year on October 3rd, pilgrims gather for the Mass of the Flame. They come from Poland, Italy, Canada, even the United States. Some bring flowers, others carry stories of healing, but all come for one reason, to thank the Virgin for what happened here. Mateusz, now a priest himself, Father Gabriel Nowak, stands at the same altar where his mentor once prayed. His voice is calm, but his eyes glisten when he speaks about that night. He wasn't burned by hate, he says. He was consumed by love. After communion, he often walks to the back of the chapel where Father Gabriel's rosary is kept in a glass reliquary. He touches the wooden beads gently and whispers, "For every fire the world sets, may love light one more candle." Piotr Lewandowski, now an old man, sits quietly in the front pew each year. His book, The Fire That Became Light, has been translated into a dozen languages. He never sought fame for it. He says it wasn't a story he wrote, it was one he received. The Vatican has not officially declared Zakrowa a miracle, but for the people who have seen, felt, and been changed by what happened there, no document could make it more real. Because miracles, they say, are not always about breaking nature's laws. Sometimes they are about restoring the law of love. As the sun sets behind the hills, the golden light pours through the chapel's glass windows, touching every face in prayer. And for a brief moment you can almost see it, the same glow that once filled the ashes, the same presence that once whispered through the fire. Faith that burns cannot be destroyed. It becomes light. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share where you're watching from, and write a short prayer in the comments for all those who suffer for their faith today. And remember, sometimes the greatest miracles begin not in heaven, but in the ashes of our own surrender. Subscribe to Ave Miracles for more true stories of faith, hope, and the Virgin Mary's presence in our world.